Welcome, my dear listener. I invite you now to settle in, to rest your body, and to let your mind drift into the quiet embrace of this story, wherever you are beneath the weight of blankets or in the hush of a still room. Allow your breathing to soften. Let the day fade behind you, and let this gentle tale carry you into the safety of the night. This is a story of quiet love, of time that moves slowly, and of one tender moment that chose to stay. Tonight we walk the cobblestone streets of a sleepy town, where lanterns glow softly in windows, where trees whisper in evening breezes, and where the past lingers like a perfume in the air. Our story begins not with noise, not with haste, but with a single sound. A soft ticking in the silence. Evelyn had always loved wandering without direction. On quiet afternoons, when the world seemed drowsy, she would find herself strolling through narrow lanes lined with brick houses, ivy climbing their sides, their shutters painted in faded colors softened by the years. The town itself moved slowly, as though its heartbeat had grown unhurried with time. People spoke gently here, nodding to each other in passing, carrying baskets of bread or flowers, their days unfolding like steady ripples in a pond. And yet, Evelyn often felt as if she were moving at a different pace. Inside her, time did not settle so easily. There was always a faint pull, not urgent, but constant. A sense of waiting for something unnamed. It was on one such afternoon, as sunlight thinned into the first suggestion of evening, that she noticed a shop she had never seen before. Its windows were hazy with dust, its wooden sign barely legible, the letters worn smooth, and behind the glass, row after row of clocks stood silently, their faces still, their hands unmoving. Evelyn paused, drawn to the peculiar stillness of it all. Dozens of clocks, tall and small, gilded and plain, yet not one of them moved. Not one tick echoed in the hush, except there, faint, almost shy, a single delicate ticking. It came from somewhere inside, soft as a heartbeat muffled beneath layers of time. She pushed open the door, and the hinges creaked as though grateful for company. The air within smelled faintly of cedar and oil, the scent of wood and memory. Inside, the shop was dim, lit only by the pale glow of the street beyond. Clocks lined every surface, the walls, the counters, even shelves that reached near the ceiling, and all were still, their faces frozen, their hands parted, their pendulums at rest. All except one. It was a small clock, resting on a wooden table near the center of the room. Its brass frame gleamed faintly, and its hands moved slowly, carefully, as though unwilling to disturb the silence around it. Tick, tock, tick, tock. The sound was steady, comforting, like the echo of a remembered lullaby. Evelyn felt her breath soften as she stepped closer. Something about the clock unsettled her gently, not in fear, but in recognition, as if the sound were calling to something deep inside her, something long forgotten. She leaned closer, listening. The ticking felt almost alive, as though each beat were speaking to her in a language she couldn't quite translate. Her gaze settled on the hands. They moved with patient precision, their journey leading toward a single place, toward a moment she didn't yet understand. And in that quiet, Evelyn realized she had not wandered here by accident. Something had brought her. Something. Or someone. The clock ticked once more, a soft breath in the silence, and Evelyn stayed. The days that followed seemed quieter to Evelyn. Even as she walked through the same streets, past the same familiar bakery, and paused at the fountain where sparrows dipped their wings, something within her had shifted. It was the sound she carried with her now. That steady, gentle ticking. It night, she found herself remembering it the way it had filled the silence of the little shop, the way it had echoed softly in her chest. It was as though the rhythm had followed her home, threading itself into her thoughts, steadying her in ways she could not explain. And so she returned. The shop was never locked. Its door gave way with the same creak of hinges, as though welcoming her back each time. The air inside always smelled faintly of polished wood and dust, the stillness so deep she could almost hear her own heartbeat. The clock stood just as she had left them, countless faces frozen in place, but her eyes always found the same. One, the little brass clock with its quiet pulse. Tick, tock, tick, tock. She began to notice something she had missed before. The hands of the clock did not wander freely across its face. They seemed to circle slowly, deliberately, only to return again and again to the same place. To the same moment. For minutes passed for cola, no for a tea first. She thought it must be coincidence, but no matter when she came, no matter how long she stayed, her eyes would eventually find the hands resting there again, as if the clock itself longed for that time and could not bear to move beyond it. Each visit, she lingered a little longer. Sometimes she would sit in the chair near the counter, simply listening. Sometimes she would close her eyes and let the ticking fill her, as though it were a soft blanket laid gently over her shoulders. 4:04. The numbers settled into her like a secret. They began to accompany her in quiet ways. She noticed the hour. When she prepared tea, she caught sight of it on a passing church bell. She woke one dawn to find her clock at home glowing with those very digits in the dimness. It was never loud, never demanding, just present. A quiet reminder, circling back again and again. And Eveline, though she could not say why, began to wait for it. The streets of the town grew softer with autumn's touch. Leaves turned golden and amber, falling in slow spirals onto the cobblestones. Lanterns were lit earlier each evening, casting a tender glow across shop fronts, and in the midst of this unhurried season, Eveline kept returning to the little shop of clocks. Her steps carried her there without thought, as though guided by something more than choice. She would listen, she would watch, and each time her heart seemed to lean more gently toward that steady rhythm. 4:04, a time she did not yet understand, but one that seemed to understand her. And so Eveline stayed. One late afternoon, when the light outside had softened to the color of candle flame, Eveline returned to the little shop once more. The door gave its familiar sigh as it opened, and the hush greeted her like an old friend. The scent of cedar and polished brass hung in the air, mingling with the faintest trace of autumn carried in on her coat. But this time, something was different. The ticking was their steady, calm, waiting, but woven into it was another sound, a softer sound, careful and deliberate, like the turning of a tiny key. She paused near the doorway, her breath quiet. There, by the wooden table at the shop's heart, stood a man. He was bent slightly forward, his hands moving with a gentleness born of patience. In one palm, he held the small brass clock, in the other, a delicate winding key, which he turned. Slowly, almost tenderly, as though tending to something far more precious than mere gears and springs, the lamplight caught his profile, calm, unhurried, his expression softened by focus. A man not hurried by the world, but in rhythm with it. His hair, touched with the faintest silver, fell softly over his brow. His coat, though simple, carried the scent of old wool and rain. Eveline stood still, uncertain whether to step forward or retreat. But he lifted his head then, as though he had already known she was there. Their eyes met, and in that quiet, something passed between them, not startling, not sudden, but deep and familiar, like a memory stirred by scent or song. He offered the smallest of smiles, one that seemed to say, ah. At last, Evelyn's voice was almost a whisper when it came. You keep it alive. The man looked down at the little clock in his hand, its ticking filling the space between them. He nodded, his voice low and warm, like dusk settling on the rooftops. Yes, someone must. It is the only one that remembers. Evelyn stepped closer, drawn not only by the clock, but by the calm that seemed to surround him. Remembers what? She asked, though she already felt the answer hovering like a shadow at the edge of thought. His eyes lifted to hers again, steady, knowing, kind. The moment, he said softly, the one that chose to stay. Her gaze fell to the clock's hands, once again poised at 4:04, unwavering. The ticking pulsed gently through the air, and for the first time she noticed how it matched her own breath. 4:04. The silence deepened, but it was not empty. It was full of questions unspoken, of recognition not yet named. The man placed the clock back onto the table, resting his hand upon it for a moment as though giving thanks. Then, without urgency, he stepped aside, leaving space for her to draw near, and Evelyn did. Her fingertips brushed the edge of the clock's brass frame, warm from his touch. The ticking seemed louder now, though still gentle, a heartbeat. Shared. When she finally looked up, he was watching her, his expression quiet but filled with something she could not name. Something that felt both new and impossibly old. And in that stillness, Evelyn realized she was no longer just a visitor. She was part of whatever the clock was keeping. The man inclined his head slightly, his voice barely above a breath. I wondered how long it would take for you to return. And Evelyn, her own voice softer than the ticking, answered simply, I think I was always meant to. The clock ticked once more. Time for that moment felt infinite. The shop grew dimmer as the evening deepened. Light from the street lamps outside filtered faintly through the dusty window panes, painting long golden strokes across the faces of the silent clocks. Only one still moved. Only one still whispered. Tick, tock, tick, tock. Evelyn stood beside the little brass clock, her hand resting lightly against the table as if to steady herself. The man remained close, his presence not intrusive, but like a steady flame in the room's hush. She turned her eyes to him, her voice quiet but curious. Why? 4:04. The man did not answer at once. He glanced down at the clock, then back. To her, as though weighing the gentlest way to place something fragile into her keeping. Finally, he spoke, his tone low and unhurried, like the murmur of a stream. It was the moment, he said softly. The first moment. Evelyn tilted her head, her brow faintly furrowed, though her heart had already begun to understand. He went on, his eyes never leaving hers. The first time our hands touched. Not here, not now, long ago. Somewhere else, the ticking seemed to pause in her chest. Her breath caught, not in surprise, but in recognition. A forgotten warmth stirred beneath her skin, a memory she had never placed, yet always carried. She whispered, I remember something, not clearly, but I feel it. His gaze softened, a wistful smile touching his lips. Yes, time can lose its way, but some moments. They choose to stay, no matter the years, no matter the lives. They wait. 4:04. The hands of the clock glowed faintly in the lamplight, as though nodding in agreement. Evelyn felt the rhythm aligning with her own pulse, steady and sure. She closed her eyes for a moment, and in that darkness it came to her a faint echo, like light through a half-opened door. A courtyard bathed in dusk, a soft brush of fingers. As she passed something to another hand, a spark of recognition, of warmth, of quiet belonging, and then the hour. 4:04. She opened her eyes again, her breath slow, her body filled with a calm that was almost luminous. The man had not moved. He stood steady, watching her with patience, as though he had been waiting for her to arrive at this realization in her own time. Her voice was nearly a sigh. So it was real. He nodded once, gently. Yes, real enough to endure, real enough to circle back. They stood together in the hush, the air between them filled with the weight of a truth that felt both immense and feather light. And in that stillness, Evelyn realized something deeper. It wasn't only the moment that had stayed. It was him, it was her. It was the quiet bond that neither distance nor time nor silence had managed to fade. The clock ticked on, soft and faithful. She found herself whispering, almost as though afraid the sound of her words would dissolve the fragile beauty of the moment. Then, perhaps we've been waiting for this all along. His smile was tender, carrying neither haste nor demand, only presence. Perhaps, he said, and perhaps now there is no need to wait. Their eyes lingered, not urgently. Not with fire, but with the comfort of something deeply known, like two travelers who, after a long and winding road, had found themselves seated at the same bench, at last, and in that quiet. Time rested too. In the days that followed, Evelyn found herself moving to a rhythm that was not her own, and yet felt perfectly natural. Each afternoon, as the hour drew near, her steps would carry her to the little clock shop. She did not plan it, not at first. She would simply notice the light changing, the way the town seemed to hush, and her heart would know where she was meant to be. Always she arrived just before the moment. Always she stayed until the hands of the brass clock aligned once more at 4:04, and always he was there. The man never asked why she came, nor did he ever seem surprised to see her. He would be tending quietly to the shelves, dusting the faces of still clocks, or winding the little brass one with steady care. His presence filled the shop with a warmth Evelyn had not realized she'd been missing all her life, the warmth of knowing someone else was simply their dot of tea first. Their words were few, a greeting, a small observation about the weather, or the sound of rain on the windows. But often they said nothing at all, and it was in those silences that Evelyn felt the deepest peace. She would sit in the chair near the counter, listening to the ticking. He would stand beside the clock, his hand resting lightly on the table. Their breaths would fall into rhythm, their stillness carrying more weight than any conversation might. Sometimes their hands would brush when they both reached for the little clock. Just a touch fleeting, but enough to send a quiet recognition through her chest. Not a jolt, but a gentle warmth, like a shawl being draped over her shoulders. One afternoon, when golden light slanted through the dusty windows and filled the shop with a soft haze, Evelyn leaned against the chair back, her voice barely more than a sigh. It feels like this moment is outside of everything else, as if the world pauses with us. He glanced at the clock, then back at her, his smile small but sure. Perhaps it does. Perhaps the world knows when to rest. 4:04, the hands aligned, and the ticking seemed to soften, as though bowing to the hour. Evelyn closed her eyes, letting the sound carry her deeper into stillness. From then on, she began to arrange her days around the moment. She no longer drifted without direction. She no longer felt the faint pull of waiting. The pull had led her here, to this place, to this hour, to this companionship that needed no explanation. She would bake a little bread in the morning, or walk the market, or sit by the fountain with a book. And when the hour approached, she would rise and make her way through the cobblestone streets, her heart lighter with each step. Inside the shop, time was not measured by hours or days, but by presence. By the way the light changed across the windows, by the way their breaths fell in unison, by the way silence seemed to say everything that mattered. And each day, when the hands touched once more at 4:04, Evelyn felt a gentle certainty grow within her. This was not just a clock remembering. It was her heart. It was his. It was the quiet truth that love, when it is real, does not vanish with the years. It lingers, it returns, it stays, and in that presence, Evelyn found peace. The seasons shifted gently around the little town. Leaves fell, and snow came then, melted into the tender green of spring. Yet in the quiet clock shop, time held steady. The still clocks stood where they always had, their faces frozen, their hands unmoving. Only one voice remained in the hush. Tick, tock, tick, tock. The little brass clock, steady and faithful, kept circling back to the same place, always to the hour, always to the moment. 4:04, Evelyn and the man were there together now, every day. Sometimes she would arrive, with a loaf of bread wrapped in cloth to share after the hour had passed. Sometimes he would offer her tea brewed in a small kettle kept in the back, its steam curling into the air like a whispered blessing. But mostly, they shared silence. It was not empty silence. It was full of warmth, of knowing, of a tenderness that did not need words, the kind of silence that feels like home. One late afternoon, as soft rain traced patterns against the glass, Evelyn noticed the brass clock was ticking more slowly than usual. Its sound was not unsteady, but thoughtful, as though it had finally reached a place it had long been traveling toward. She and the man stood side by side, watching the hands circle, listening to each breath, each beat, and then, with a gentleness so complete it felt like a sigh, the clock ticked once more and grew still. The hands settled at 4:04, unmoving, perfect. The shop seemed to lean into the hush, as though bowing in reverence to the moment. Evelyn felt her hand brush against his, and this time, neither of them pulled away. Their fingers lingered, then intertwined, softly, naturally, as though they had always belonged that way. And no words were spoken. None were needed. The clock had done its work. It had kept the moment alive, waiting patiently for them to arrive. And now the moment had returned to them, not as a memory, but as something real, breathing, present. Evelyn closed her eyes, leaning gently against the stillness. She could feel the warmth of his hand in hers, the calm strength of his presence beside her. She could hear the rain outside, soft and lulling, like a lullaby played only for them. The world moved on, as it always would. Hours passed, days unfolded. Seasons turned, but here, within this hush, within this timeless companionship, the moment remained. It had chosen to stay, and so had they. And now, dear listener, as the story draws to its gentle close, I invite you to let go of your own day, to feel the quiet peace of Evelyn and the man, resting in the stillness of a love that needed no words, no urgency, no measure of time, just presence, just peace, just the moment that chose to stay. May your breath slow, may your body soften, and may your dreams carry you into that same hush where love is steady, time is kind, and nothing more is needed. Good night, and sweet dreams.